Well, hello and welcome to our discussion tonight on looking towards 2030, a crucial decade for high nature value farming in Ireland. My name is Gwyn Jones. I'm a director of the European Forum on Nature Conservation and Pastoralism. And this event is part of our contribution to Heritage Week. And we recognise and thank the Heritage Council for their funding yet again this year for the High Nature Value Farming in Ireland initiative. So we've got 4 excellent people on the panel, all people that, well, we've worked together in various ways over the year as part of the High Nature Value Farming in Ireland work. So first we got Brendan Dunford from the Burren programme. So Brendan has been involved in 20 years of pioneering work in the Burren, the progenitor, you can say, really, of all the subsequent local and results-based projects in Ireland. He also co-founded Burren Bio, local trust working with the local community to celebrate the local environment and the role of farming in it, and to promote that message to the wider public. Then we got Henry O'Donnell. He's from Inishowen, County Donegal. He's been a farm advisor over a very long period. He's a driving force in the Inishowen EIP. Those of us from out with Ireland, it's the kind of EIP that is most familiar to us, perhaps, looking to develop and demonstrate innovative solutions, some of which at least can be rolled out in a commercial setting, so not just in policy instruments. Species-rich lays, trees on farmland, cattle on the hill, benefits of ponds, all sorts of things like that. And also for some years, Henry's been quite involved in the field of farming policy and farming politics. Caroline Sullivan, she's from the other end of the country, County Cork, but she's currently working in the largest of Ireland's EIPs, the one targeted at the hen harrier. She's the project ecologist. She used to be a colleague of ours in the HNV Ireland work. So with 1,500 farmers under contract, it's by far the largest results-based programme in Ireland and probably one of the largest in Europe. So Caroline's based in Moran, and she works day-to-day mainly on the more than most of the hen harrier SPAs. And then last but not least, James Moran. So he's an ecologist based in Galway Mayo Institute of Technology. Originally with Teagasc, he's had 1,000 lives. He was the farm advisor in the original Burren Life project. But though he's moved to academia, I think it's fair to say that his interest in driving change which works on the ground for both the environment and farmers has kept him actively involved in research, in policy development and in real world projects, which is in a way quite unmatched in Ireland, I think, and rare elsewhere in the world. So that's the panel. So let's start. Last year we had a similar meeting where we looked back over 20 years of developments in high nature value farming in Ireland. And since that time, we've been working together in various ways, very much in the moment, looking at the current policy changes. So we want tonight to raise our heads a bit, maybe, and look forward to 10 years' time. So let's start maybe by asking what you'd like to see in 10 years' time. How would you like high nature value farming, and how would you like things to be for high nature value farming families in Ireland, and especially in the particular areas where you work, I suppose. So maybe not talking about individual policies just now, but the general feel of things, what you hope things will be like in 10 years. Maybe we start with you, Brendan.
Thanks, Gwyn. Yeah, you don't often get a chance to look up and look ahead in this business. We're all so busy with the day-to-day, and I can't say I've thought a lot about it. But if I were to think about it, I guess my hope for the Burren region, where we've been working on this stuff, as you say, for about 20 years now, is that in 10 years' time, HNV farming is just farming. It's the norm. It's what people do here. That it's more fully integrated into what's considered to be good farming in the Burren context. I think I say that because I think the journey is a very slow and a long one, and people are kind of coming on board little by little. And things are changing in terms of the people's attitude and society's attitude to farming and what farming is supposed to be. But we've an awful long way to go, yes. Even here in the Burren, you know, some people think we're so far ahead, but actually we're not. It's a struggle day to day to keep the show on the road. So my hope would be that over the next 10 years, the trends that are becoming established are accelerated, and that farming for nature becomes just part of good farming practice. And to me, that looks like society, the public, see farmers as something more than just food producers, that they have a much broader role. But even more importantly than that, that farmers see themselves as having a broader destiny and a broader contribution to society, which goes beyond food, which includes biodiversity, which includes, you know, carbon sequestration, all those wonderful things, fire prevention and so on. And goes even beyond that into areas like education and recreation, so that farmers, I suppose, regain control of the agenda in terms of rural development. So I guess in the Burren, farmers have been a little bit passed out over the years by bigger developments around tourism and so on. And, you know, the relevance has been lost, and we've lost a lot of young people. But I'd love to see farming being reinvigorated based on environmental outcomes and good food quality, but that farmers can additionally capture added value from that by, you know, introducing people to nature and heritage on their farms, by developing niche products, be they food products, but also niche services within the environment, and they can capitalize on that. And we've seen that at farm level on a few farms where, you know, the impact in terms of the relationship between the farmer and the professional services provided by the Burren programme and monuments advisors and ecologists and, you know, farm labour contractors, guys providing gates, but then tourists coming into the area and having farm tours. I think it's just amazing when it works, when it really works. But so far it's really worked at a farm level, and in 10 years' time, I'd love to see it working at a community level. And from that farming becomes, you know, relevant again, popular again amongst young people, exciting, a really rich and diverse and exciting lifestyle and way to make a living within the region. I think that's a lot to ask for, and I don't think it'll happen whole scale, but that'd be my hope.
And do you think that these wider economic opportunities, are they things which are local to you? Are they things which you benefit from because of your unique locality? Or do you imagine them being something that can be replicated or can benefit you actually at a more Irish scale?
I think both, Gwyn, because I think every place is unique and has its unique, not just geographical and natural features, but also its unique cultural circumstances and its unique communities and things like that. And I think it's that uniqueness and authenticity that makes it special. So the Burren is amazing for those people who live here and those people who visit. But I mean, so is, you know, Wicklow and the Comras and, you know, other HNV areas. They have their special and unique attributes and values and cultures and communities. And I think that's what's lovely about the variety that you get, both in terms of the landscapes, the communities, the produce and services in those areas. So I think there's a place for all of them. All of them have something unique to offer. And I think, you know, what the Burren has to offer is special, but what other places have to offer is equally so. But I don't think we've ever actually fully realized the potential of these landscapes and the people within them. We become very specialized. We think farmers are food producers and ecologists are supposed to know about flowers, and everyone's become a specialist anymore. But we need to broaden it out and embrace broader roles. And I think it's that frame change which fascinates me most. How do we get farmers to see themselves as something more than just food producers? That's the struggle I'm fascinated by. And I think it's, if we can solve that one, I think farmers themselves and the viability and sustainability of what they do will be greatly enhanced.
Thanks, Brenda. Henry, what's your view? How do you see things for farmers in Inishowen and more widely in Donegal and in the marginal areas in 10 years?
Well, I think I would have to say that I would hope for what Brendan so eloquently put forward there, but I think it may take a bit longer. I think farmers are very good at responding to agricultural policy. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes not so good. So really, I would feel what we need in the next 10 years is more recognition of HNV farming practices, and recognition of the output. I think we need to broaden the conversation from the output being some form of food, that there's much more. But at the same time, I think we can't lose sight of the fact that HNV farming produces, by and large, fabulous quality food that is currently being sold as a commodity. And we need policy adjustments to move away from that, because the whole commodity really is a drive to the bottom, and HNV farming needs to survive, and it's not going to survive if it's not properly supported, one, and two, if it doesn't get recognition and a fair price for the fabulous produce that comes off these farms as well. So I think we don't need to lose sight of what we're actually producing. And we do need recognition for what we do in terms of biodiversity and water quality and climate. And I feel that there's gaps there in policy that need to be closed, that where our day-to-day activity on HNV farms is providing so much that's not currently taken into account. And I would be very conscious that future policy needs to be directed to take that into account. And that the whole area of what is sustainable farming, well, the HNV farming model is the holy grail when it comes to that. But I think currently that's not recognized. And that's going to be something we need to do in the next 10 years. As regard HNV farmers, well, on a very basic level, I think that they need to be incentivized to get involved and to continue what has been done for generations, and that's a whole area of conversation in itself. Sorry.
And do you think it's a realistic prospect that farms in general now can be both HNV and socioeconomically viable in 10 years' time? Or do you think, as now, there's a bit of a competition between the two?
Well, I think they're very entitled to CAP support, and I think the European consumer would recognize that, and that on one hand there should be and will be hopefully sufficient CAP support, but there also needs to be a recognition of the produce and support from that, and other opportunities maybe outside of CAP that Brendan alluded to are potential income streams, because we need to remember that there's a lot of farmers, especially on HNV land, that are probably underemployed, and there's a huge resource there that could be very good for local rural economies if it was tapped into to a greater extent. So I think there can be a great lifestyle and basically a farming system there to propagate going forward that should return for the people carrying it out. And I don't apologize for one, asking for some support for those farmers, and two, asking that other avenues be developed to supplement their income.
Okay, let's come back to the detailed policy maybe a bit later. Caroline, what's your view? How do you see the future for either your home area in West Cork or people in Harrier areas? It's less touristy, isn't it, than Brendan's area? So there's less footfall there. There's less distinctiveness, maybe. How do you see things?
Yeah, it's a very different landscape, because for a lot of the SPAs we're dealing with, there's about 50% forestry cover, and from a tourism perspective, that does put a bit of a dampener on things, unfortunately. I suppose from the point of view of the future and how we would like to see things in the SPAs in 10 years' time, we'd mostly be directed by the farmer participants in the area. Before we kicked off the programme, we ran a consultation and we asked the farmers what they would like in an ideal situation, what would they like things to look like in 20 years' time. And profitable is the number one desire for the farmers in that area. But for them to be still farming and for that farming to be sustainable, we're close second in that consideration. And I suppose that's key, really. I know Henry mentioned it, but sustainability is key for all of farming in Ireland, but certainly in these areas they're maybe more aware of what sustainability might mean in terms of delivery of ecosystem services. Another thing that they really want to see is succession, and for young farmers to want to come to these areas. So again, touching on Brendan's desire for diversification and Henry's desire for good quality products, those things need to be I guess focused on and strongly marketed, and yeah, it's something that would be really beneficial in these areas. Some of the other things that the farmers are aware of and what would like to see continuing is the high biodiversity value of these areas and the benefits of these areas from a hen harrier point of view. So they do feel like they're custodians of the hen harriers to a certain extent, and so again, I suppose seeing some improvement in the hen harrier population would also be nice in the next 10 years or so.
When you're talking about succession there, what's your feeling? Is it at base a purely economic thing, or is there going back to what Brendan was saying, a part of this thing about what good farming is and what a good life is and all these kind of things?
Yeah, I suppose interestingly, this global pandemic has made people who live in cities a lot more open to the idea of going back to their home areas, where this claustrophobic feeling that you might have gotten having to stay within your 5 kilometers in a city the same feeling doesn't transcribe to these areas. So yeah, do people want to be farming while they're doing that though? I'm not really sure. There's, from a rural regeneration point of view, good broadband and Wi-Fi could make working and part-time farming much more viable and much more appealing to people. But yeah, I guess it's hard to put your finger on. I guess in my work generally with high nature value farmers across the country, that there is a younger cohort there. There are people who just love to work on the land and for whom it does the soul good, and they just want to be doing that. And so they need to be, I guess, for this type of farming to be presented as an opportunity and a positive thing, as opposed to the only option available to them.
Yeah, I remember a farmer on Islay saying to me that when his father took over the farm, it was as the eldest son, and when he took it over, it was as the youngest son. It was just a duty really that somebody had to do by his generation. So if that was to change, that would be a really marvelous thing. James, you had a few days to think about these questions. What's your take on things?
I suppose from a national perspective, I think I'd come back to a lot what Henry, Caroline and Brendan said. A lot of this needs to come back down to recognition of these areas, and across society, including within the farming community, recognizing the value of high nature value farmland areas. I would like to see really by 2030 that the word marginal is nearly gone out of our vocabulary, and we don't use marginal and high nature value or these areas in the one sentence, I think the one key thing that in the next 10 years is we have a lot of high level commitments for 2030 in terms of climate, biodiversity, but also wider in terms of the sustainable development goals in relation to food security, equality, education, across society, across the 3 pillars of sustainability in terms of economic, social, and environmental. And I think in that context, if we recognize that high nature value farmland areas have an awful lot to offer in terms of reaching our environmental goals, like these areas, it's recognized across Europe, have the highest stores of carbon within the soil and significant potential for more storage of carbon. They have extremely potential for high quality products as well. As Henry has said, going into commodity markets for this is a real undervaluing of the quality of the product coming from these areas. So I would like to see, I suppose, in 2030 that these areas are recognized for their environmental quality, recognized for what they contribute to the environment, but also recognized for what they contribute to actual society at large. Most people don't see when they actually recreate now at the moment. Most people have headed, as soon as the place reopened when they couldn't go abroad, they headed west, headed to the hills, to get some relief from the drudgery of the COVID situation. And what they've escaped to is, in their minds, a higher quality environment, more open spaces. That is the product of centuries of essentially high nature value farmland. So these areas bring us, essentially help us to meet our environmental targets, potential for a high quality food product also, but also renewal of the soul and an awful lot to bring in terms of well-being as well and recreation. Now, the big challenge is by 2030, I think what we've done in the last number of years is we've laid the foundations with a range of projects across the country showing proof of concept, essentially. But that's all it is. We have shown in many areas that we can create systems and incentives where farmers can be rewarded for the quality of the environment. So that we have these results-based payments. So we can have a situation where a farmer can produce a higher quality field as regards the environment and get a higher quality or higher payment from the consumer for it through their taxes. And there is a willingness for the consumers and taxpayers actually to pay that. So I would like to see that by 2030 in particular, that, and the foundations will be laid now in the next 2 years on this, if we know in the next 2 years whether this will be achieved or not, them opportunities for farmers to get involved in these payments for ecosystem services, results-based payment, is extended to over 1 million hectares across the country, and 25 to 30,000 farmers are availing of this by 2030. If we have that situation created, we'll be gone into the next policy cycle at that stage. We'll have, hopefully by 2030, 25 to 30,000 farmers actively involved in this management of the environment, it contributing significantly to a proportion of their business. And at that stage, I think if that's created in the next 5 years, in the following 5 years, we'll see because there's money coming into these rural areas, we'll see other young people attracted to it. We'll have entrepreneurs coming into this. And I think at that stage, we should start seeing differentiation of products, seeing eco labels coming in, seeing this appearing in the major supermarkets as well as in farmer markets, the way you have this high nature value brand that is recognized by society. And I think there is such a volume of product produced on this along the West Coast and in these areas. There is opportunity, I think, if Board BIA get behind it. This is one of the things I'd like to see by 2030, is that Board BIA are essentially marketing HNV meat products, dairy products across Europe and across the globe as rival to a Kerrygold product, So it is, we're doing our traditional Kerrygold, which might be our commodities and getting a higher value for that. But we have a higher end product again on top of that has an eco label on top of it. And then as well, if parallel to that, if we have following on from what we see in this area, the areas of many people escaping to these areas for recreation, tourism potential. There's a huge opportunity to capitalize on that now. We should see less people going on foreign holidays. It won't be as socially acceptable to be flying across the world on cheap flights by 2030. I don't think it'll go in the next 5 years. It'll be a bit of a rebound, but we cannot have a situation where we don't have taxes on aviation fuel. We cannot have a situation where flights are as cheap as they are. So we'll have more people holidaying at home. I think that is a real opportunity for rural businesses as well to link in. So you have this whole food experience, environment experience, recreational and well-being experience. And I think by 2030, we won't see this wholesale, but I think we'll see, I would hope to see at that stage that we have it well embedded in policy. We have the payment for ecosystem services, farmers being paid for the environmental quality, this wide scale. And there's no question in 2030 whether that's going to be extended or not. It's going to be something that's going to be there, and it's going to be expected that it's going to be there all the time. And then you have, at that stage, we should have, the same as we have the pilots now, we have niche businesses, enterprises set up, dotted across these HNV areas that are capitalizing this. I think at that stage in 2030, we won't be talking about these areas as marginal. We'll be talking about these areas as food hubs in high environmental quality, basically vestiges and basically reservoirs of rural entrepreneurship as well, that where we have this rural broadband coming in and people coming back from the cities to these areas, we have got a very highly educated population. I think even now, most farmers' sons and daughters are going into education in various different roles across business, sciences. So we'll have an even higher educated workforce coming back to these areas during the next 10 years. And that can only see positives if we create the correct policy environment to enable this to happen. So I think some of this might be pie in the sky sort of stuff, but we know if it's pie in the sky in the next 2 years, to be honest, because if we have the foundations and we don't build on them foundations, basically we're going to be in the same place now, still fighting for this in 10 years' time, but we have to move on.
Okay. Can I be a devil's advocate then?
Far away, I need it.
I'll ask you all this, I think. Whoever wants to respond can put their hand up. I obviously have some familiarity with the Irish scene, and I've been working with you all on the kind of vision that we're talking about. But when you look from outside in Ireland, there's another narrative, isn't there? There's a narrative of Ireland, the food exporter, Ireland, the producing dairying products for the world, Ireland, we need to plant more trees, and where best but to do them, but the West. So how do we resolve the two, or how do we have a solution that we think makes more sense? I mean, what's the contradictions we see in that kind of argument? Do you want to start, Brendan?
Yeah, I think the short answer would be quality over quantity, Gwyn. I think, you very kindly referred to the Burren as the progenitor of like a lot of the EIP projects and the successful projects in Ireland. And I think Ireland itself can be the progenitor of many amazing national level interventions at the European level, because I think we are leading the charge here with some of the result-based program and the locally led stuff. I think it's really exciting. And I think, as somebody put it, Ireland can be the green heart of the Green Deal. And I think if you have, a strong and proven reputation for sustainability, and Board B, in fairness, keep talking about proving improvements. That's the new mantra. And I think if we can genuinely do that, and we can in Ireland, do it in a way without damaging, our natural environment and without further undermining rural communities, then I think we've got a very legitimate product on the world stage, which can capture added value. So I think we'll be producing less of produce. We still have to export. We're an exporting nation, but we can produce stuff of a far higher quality and command a higher price legitimately, because I think, we've got a lot of changes in society, from urbanization to different movements like that. So I think there will be demand for really super high quality, super authentic products which support farm families, support rural environment, deliver ecosystem services, and deliver good price back to the farmer. And I think we uniquely in Ireland have a competitive advantage in hitting that sweet spot. And so for me, that's possible. I'm not saying it'll happen, because I think a lot of people need to change and a lot of things need to happen for that change to come up. But I think the potential is definitely there for us to do that.
Henry, to what extent do you think that the weakness of HNV farming is due to the, free pass maybe is too strong a word for it, that's given to more intensive farming, that you fall behind because they're allowed to get away with more? Do you think that's a fair characterization, or do you think I'm being cynical?
Well, my take on it is that Ireland is a very small country, and to say that maybe there are regions in Ireland that aren't HNV farming systems, I think we can't just say, right, well, they can basically do what they like and intensify as much as possible. The reality, as I say, is it's a small country here, and we have to find a balance here that for everybody to coexist in different farming systems. And I think what it boils down to is somebody that's responsible for policy implementation to actually be brave, and there has to be parameters set for all of Ireland and for all types of farmers that we have to prioritize our water quality. We have to look at farm inputs, and it can't just be exponential, and we can't just select areas in Ireland that it's not as much odds about one area as another as regards water quality and biodiversity and everything else. It's been proven that there can be biodiversity on all types of farm, and I think we have a responsibility as all types of farmers that we have to protect water quality, and we can't have it that our people that do analysis on water quality can correlate certain farming activities to decreases in water quality. We just compliance has to play a role here, and we can't just say, okay, that area isn't a high nature value farming area, so it doesn't matter as much about the water quality there. You know, we just can't go down that road, and it's going to take some brave policy decisions. And like I see, even some of the farming media would mention, you know, areas like New Zealand as something, as a fabulous example of farming practice. It's becoming very apparent that isn't necessarily the case, and I think we have an opportunity here to protect what we have and hopefully improve it. But it's going to take brave policy decisions to actually put something in place, to put parameters there, right? That level of intensity of inputs or of output just isn't something that we want to inflict on our Irish countryside. And we just can't say, right, oh, well, there's loads of high nature value farming land in Ireland. We'll emphasize what we're doing there. As I say, it's a small island. We have to protect it all. And it's going to take some brave policy decisions to actually implement that. And we do have scientific data to use, which will justify these decisions. And I just hope that the powers that be will be brave enough to do that, because it shouldn't just be selective. And even if you take peatlands as an example, of course we all want to protect and enhance peatlands, but we just can't say that that's all we need to do. Everything else is fine. We have to look at all our farming systems And all farming systems can be improved, including high nature value farming systems. And as I say, we need brave policy decisions to implement that, because you can't just select one area for nature and for protecting biodiversity. We have to do it everywhere.
Yeah, we were discussing in a meeting earlier today the protection of peatlands and how the peatlands under intensive grassland, of course, is also being damaged. It's not just peatlands in the west that are eroding. No, that's an interesting point. One of the things that underlines quite a lot of your comments, I think, whether it was about policy or board beer or whatever, is this question of a narrative. Brendan touched on it at the start, of what good farming is. We hear people in some of your fellow projects and fellow advisors saying that it starts at the university, it starts, at the grassroots, it starts with the farming papers maybe. So how do we think that can be changed for the better in the next 10 years? Whoever wants to pitch in, who?
I'm happy to give a shameless plug. The little project we set up, we've been, very briefly, Gwen, we've been really, interested in this issue for a long time. We often say the pocket, the head and the heart. And I think the heart piece, that engagement piece about what it means to be a good farmer and to love what you do and therefore to do it well, it applies to all of us and all our professions. But years ago in the Burren, as you know, we have a result-based payment system here, but we wanted to redefine within the Burren context what it meant to be a good farmer. So we set up this little community award so that once a year, we selected a farmer whose environmental health score on his farm had increased by the greatest amount of anybody else within the community. And we gave them a nice prize sponsored by Board BIA. In front of their whole community and said, look, this farmer has done amazing things without necessarily cutting back on his stock numbers, working hard, being a very active farmer, being a very smart and innovative farmer. And therefore we're celebrating him, and we have another award for the farm family and so on. And it's fantastic because it helped people realize actually there is another way. And by farming like this, you're actually continuing to produce good food and other stuff which society really wants. And I think it was a strong message, particularly for young people, maybe to see that there's a bigger, brighter future for farming. So we took that to a national level with Board B support a few years ago through this Farming for Nature program, where we kind of identify farmers who day in, day out are doing great things for nature, as a way of highlighting them, not just to the broader public, but to fellow farmers, to saying, look, this is what we do. We love it. This is how we do it. These are some, practical things that we've done that have given us a lot of joy and haven't affected our bottom line, to celebrate them. And I mean, it's been a fantastic success. It's just been a nice positive project because the narrative on mainstream media is unrelentingly negative and divisive and binary. It's an extraordinary extent which isn't reflected on the ground. So I think to flip that around is really important, and we're working with other countries now to pilot that as well. And I think James and myself have often talked about this notion of legacy. If you sit long enough for the farmer, they'll always talk about their legacy and what they want to leave behind for the next generation, and it's usually expressed in the form of, I want to leave the land in better condition. And I think, what is better condition? To redefine that, it's kind of like doing an exam, doing leaving cert here in Ireland. The better you do, the more options you have. And I always think that leaving the land in better condition means leaving more options and opportunities for your kids. And I think farming in a way that respects the environmental outcomes and keeps the complexity both of habitats and farming systems within the land can be the best legacy of all. And I think that speaks very well to high nature value farming and broader farming as well, of course. So I think things can be done, but my overall point would be, it's critically important that we change this prevailing negative narrative into a positive one, if only for the fact that most of our farmers in the Burren are now in their average age, late 50s. We need to get the younger farmers back, and I think they want to feel that they're engaged in something that's meaningful and that's contributing to society at large. And I think what we're saying here, high nature value farming, ecosystem services, good quality food, that does just that.
Very positive, but how how will that be rolled out across the country? I mean, are you saying that the Burren farmers themselves will sort of infect advisors and will infect the universities or whatever? You know, what's the feedback?
So with the Farming for Nature thing, it's actually national. So we farmers in, I think, 23 or 4 counties at this stage. So who do farmers listen to? Who do they respect? Is it their Taglisk advisor? Is it a university student coming out? Is it the policymaker? Who do they really listen to? They listen to their neighbours, their fellow farmers, because they trust them. They believe that this farmer knows practically how things work on the ground. They know that this other farmer has been there, has worked, the language is right. And I think farmers really do listen to other farmers. And I think both in terms of inspiration and guidance and practical farming advice, I think the value of the peer learning and peer knowledge transfer is huge. And I think it's that, Gwyn, that we're trying to get at, is to sort of, again, reframe it, reframe the message, but also reframe the messenger, where this message is coming from. That's really important. I think even in the climate debate, too much of the information has come from the scientists and it hasn't been engaging enough. It hasn't got people in. The language has been wrong. And I think that's just a part, mind you, of the problem.
Has anybody else got any reflections on that?
Maybe just to comment that I think our agricultural education system has a huge role to play here, and maybe their focus is narrow at the moment, and as to what avenue there is to change that, I'm not 100% sure. I just think that the whole education area needs to be broadened. It's very much on an economic and an output basis at the moment, and it's not leaving enough room for everything else, and it's maybe putting negative connotations on farmers on high nature value land with lower stocking rates, and maybe there's no recognition, as we said at the start, about other outputs from the farm. I don't see that coming across in education, speaking to young farmers, and their key message coming home is we need to intensify, we need to keep more stock, we need to use more inputs, we need to use more fertilizer, we need to reseed with more perennial ryegrass. Maybe in some farm situations that's the right advice, but I would feel very strongly in a lot of farms that it's not. And
I think
sorry,
to cut across Henry there, I think the reason for that, Henry, is that none of those things you describe have a value. And I think we can put a price on them as per result-based projects. Then there'll be demand to find out, well, how do we realize that value from these assets? And I think that's what's been missing. I think the demand for that kind of training and education and learning will be there if we manage to put somehow a value on some of these ecosystem services. I think up to now, the only value has been on the food, the commodity, and that's why there's been a hunger for information. How do we produce more of it?
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%, Brendan. And there's also no emphasis on rewarding people for sequestration on their farms, or rewarding for biodiversity either, as you say. So no, I would agree with that very much, Brendan.
Okay, we're getting to the final third of the discussion. Before we go into individual policy initiatives and instruments that we think will give us some hope for a future, I wondered if we could just reflect a bit on the policy process. I've had the privilege of being involved in it in a small way this year, and it's been quite eye-opening, actually. So without even going into the details of policies themselves, how do you think the policy process in Ireland can be improved? James.
I suppose I could start. I suppose that the big thing in Ireland is that we're a very small country, and that we're very close to the actual decision makers, which I suppose in terms of the policy process is a very good thing. But I think on the other side of it, the people who get to the policy makers first, guard them as their asset and keep it under tight wraps. And it's very difficult to get alternative views across the line. I think that's one of the reasons why things are so slow to change, both in terms of education policy, as we've been talking about, but also the actual direction of agriculture in terms of responding to challenges. But I think we can turn that sort of small population close to policymakers into a positive if we have more openness and transparency brought into the process. I think a lot of the times we have this illusion that it's open and transparent in terms of that's one thing this year, we have so many consultations on everything, like, you know, so this is nearly a government consultation every second week, but it's consultation fatigue, because the way it's done is the documents are put out there, they're quite technical. You have a set questionnaire to fill in that's predetermined to your multiple choice questions, what response you're going to get, and to a certain extent it predetermines the outcome. So, and essentially you get tied up in this consultation process while the decisions behind the scenes are being made in the civil service and with the minister's advisors and their close industry partners, you know. So I think in terms of the process, what needs to change is, it's on paper, it's the right process, you know, we're close to policymakers, there's consultation there, but it has to be improved in terms of the communications of it and also the timeframes in which it's done. If this makes sense, you know. So it's one of the things. It's quite hard to actually identify what's wrong with the process, because there's a lot right with it, but it's the wrong decisions are still not, or the right decisions aren't being. We're not getting to the right answers still, you know, and a lot of people are still feel disillusioned by the policy process, and even though there is so much consultation, I think there's a lot within agricultural circles that feel their views still aren't being heard, I think, you know.
Who else wants to say something? Caroline?
Yeah, I suppose it needs to be more of a two-way process from a lot earlier on, in my opinion, that I think the department have ideas, but it would be better if they expressed those ideas maybe in smaller focus groups a lot sooner than they tend to do, so that things can develop more organically over time, instead of just being kind of a huge national response to the one document that you get to comment on. And I think as well, things do need to be evidence-based, and there also needs to be some discussion about the suitability of the source of that evidence for an Irish situation. So you can say this is evidence-based because there's a published paper that shows that this works in the Netherlands, but to then translate that to an Irish situation and just say we're going to take it, we won't change it, and we're going to implement it in an Irish policy context is wrong, and something that is easily rectified again with just more conversation and talking about the people who are implementing things on the ground. And the last thing I think would be really beneficial would be more consideration for the target of these policies, which is the farmer in this instance. Again, from our consultation in 2017, just the paperwork is something that's really off-putting for people, and the understanding of why something is being put in place is lost. And how can you expect someone to respond to a policy if they don't know why this new policy is in place? Or they might be responding, but they're responding in the wrong way and changing the wrong things to the detriment of the correct things. And that's all, I suppose, a failing in the policy process. It's just a consideration of the farmer.
I remember you saying to me after your meetings how surprised the farmers were to have a real meaningful consultation, actually, despite the plethora of consultations they get from government. They didn't really feel that they were being given a real chance to input.
Yeah, we asked for their opinion and then we said nothing to allow their voices be heard. And it took them a little while to warm to the idea that they should be the ones talking because we would listen. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, if I may say, that struck me was the extremely short amount of time over which decisions seemed to be made. And I didn't really understand why that had to be the case. As Caroline says, there's a need for evidence base, but in the case of the EIPs, for example, the EIPs are their own evidence base. They're a huge wealth of knowledge there, the huge wealth of experience, and the government set them up partly in order to gain that experience, and yet didn't seem to have a process to access it over that time frame or to feed it into policy over that time frame. It was really, really surprising to me as an outsider. Brendan, you wanted to say something?
Just to kind of add to some of the stuff, like I do have sympathy for some of the people involved in policy making, because it is genuinely very complex and there's so many different people involved. I do feel a lot of the consultation is very formulaic, and as you know, there's different levels of consultation, and I think unfortunately we're among the lower levels. I don't think it's very meaningful sometimes, and I think, as Caroline said, a lot of the EIPs and the Burren programme, their success has really been built upon the fact that we started with the farmers, with deep listening to the farmers and taking that time to learn from them. I also think with a lot of the policies, there's policy fatigue and consultation fatigue, but yet there's this massive inconsistency between what we're saying we need to do and what we're actually laying down on policy. It seems to be such a struggle all the time. And I do think as well, and we're all guilty of this, I suppose, looking after our own turf. I think there is a little bit of that, of that protectionism, that there's not really a trusting between partners. And this isn't a criticism at Irish level, because I've seen the same thing at commission level between DG Agri and DG Environment. We don't quite trust you or what you're about. And I think until that change and we kind of all see the bigger picture and work together, it sounds a bit blasé, but that's just, I keep thinking we're still way away from that situation yet.
Okay, let's finish on a positive note. I think we probably all believe in policy change by evolution. We're not revolutionaries, really. So I suppose getting to 2030 means going on a few steps at a time. And when we did this meeting last year and looked back, actually, we saw that a lot of things had changed in 20 years. So what do we see out there just now working that we think are probably going to be essential parts of this building towards this future? Which things are not just work, but which are scalable? So who wants to start? Do you want to start, Caroline?
So do you mean in the context of the work that we've been doing?
Possibly so, yes.
I think the flexibility that the programme has been afforded by the Department of Agriculture has been a huge part of its success. And I think that is key going forward for anything to recreate that level of success post 2022, is that to retain that flexibility. Now, of course, there are frameworks within which you have to fit from a Department of Agriculture point of view, but the more they can cater for the flexibility and the localness of the goals that they're trying to achieve, the more successful they will be. And the other thing as well, I think there's a lot of talk about landscape level interventions. We have trialed a lot of small scale landscape level interventions that can be really, really rewarding on a national scale if implemented properly as well. It is mentioned in the current document, and again, careful consideration of how that will be rolled out post 2023 could have really positive impacts as well. So I guess there are two key things that come to mind off the top of my head.
Thanks, Caroline. Henry.
Yeah, well, I think looking forward, there is momentum gathering for change in agricultural policy, and I think the barrier that traditionally has been between farmers and environmentalists, I think that barrier is starting to come down, because I think there's a lot of people starting to realize we all want the same thing here. And I think that's going to have a huge impact in the next 10 years, that when those groups come together with the same objectives, hopefully that will be a catalyst for change and for good agricultural policy, and that rural dwellers, whether they be farmers or not, can see a shared future and can see how good policy would add to that. And at the end of the day, that's the majority of rural communities, and I would like to see that relationship developed further, and I think that's how we're going to actually see real positive change in the future, because we're all living in rural communities together, and at the end of the day, maybe COVID has taught us how lucky we are, and that maybe we can come together with the same objectives to protect what we have and enhance it, and that everybody can eke out a reasonable living without contradicting each other and without damaging what surrounds us, and that we can produce fabulous food at the same time for everybody. So that would be kind of my vision. Maybe it might take slightly longer, but I can see it moving that way.
Yes, thanks, Henry. One of the things that struck me as you were talking there now, and something that is different from 7 years ago, whenever it was last time round, is that there's a much bigger community of interest now. You know, if only the, half a dozen or whatever EIPs that have met every fortnight, over the summer or whatever, with thousands of farmers involved in total, it's not just the Burren anymore. There's a large range of people over large parts of Ireland that are thinking this way, really, and that can't be put back in the box, I don't think. James, Brendan, you're going to be the last. James.
Just in terms of, I suppose, what's scalable at the moment, I think what we've done over the last number of years is that we've proved that you can create a system where you pay for environmental quality, and that farmers can make an income from that. So some of the stuff that you mentioned there that was going on in the Burren, say 10 years ago, we have proven that can work anywhere. We can have this local flexibility. We can have this payment for environmental service provision across multiple different landscapes across Ireland, and also it's been proven it can be done across Europe as well. So I think that at this stage, that's ultimately scalable. I think there should be no question, no doubt in anybody's mind. We can pay farmers as land managers for the environmental services they produce and incorporate their carbon services, their water services, and their nature services into the one simple 10-point scoring system. We have the science, we have the evidence base, we have the systems, we have the digital technology and the applications to prove this works. And also, I think the big sea change now is farmers have recognized this opportunity. I think the department have even been taken aback by the scale of interest in their national pilot of these results-based payment in REAP, So they were overscribed by threefold by the amount of farmers, and had to extend the amount of numbers that we're bringing into it. So there's no question. There's demand for consumers. There's demand from the producers on this. So there's absolutely no question in my mind, this can be done, and this can be rolled out across the country in 2023. The only thing that would stop it is the computer says no. and any computer that says no should just be trashed and reprogrammed, you know. So that's because it's ultimately us that controls the computer, you know. So from that point of view, I would say I'm very optimistic, because the administrators say this will work now as well. They've seen that it will work, you know. So I don't see any barriers to this at the moment, and I think it's surprising what we can achieve, I think, when we will create that environment over the next number of years. I think that would bring a sea change. I think often what we've been seeing 10 years ago, you go out talking to farmers about the quality, don't they live in and work in a lovely area, and then people turn to you and say, well, you can't eat the landscape, James, can you? You know, because with this, you know, you can put your kids through college, you can put food on the table right through that landscape, as well as producing a high quality food product, you know. So I think that's a note of optimism that I would have at the moment, is I see that as reality now, more so than any time in the last 20 years, you know.
Thanks, James. Brendan, I'm going to depend on you for a positive word at the end.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because we're looking back and looking forward, and I think, like, I've 20 years at this, Gwyn, and you've been there at it longer. And there's been so little change in some ways, but then there's been such big change. And I think the three big changes, I think, the game changers, I think are, first of all, I think putting a value on these ecosystem services is huge. It's transformative. It's a game changer, because then that leads to demand for information, it leads to action, it leads to outcomes, and it leads to a diversity of outcomes, which is even more important. The second thing, which I think has been a game changer for me, is the locally targeted approach. Having an approach for Connemara and for the Burren, for the Arons, for Wicklow, I think that's huge. It gives more ownership, more diversity, gives more buy-in. It's just fantastic, and I think we need more of that as we go along. And the third thing, I think, which is great, but we've got a long way to go on, is farmers taking centre stage in the whole, because those are the people at the coalface. So policy and science should be at the service of farmers delivering these environmental outcomes. And I think we've seen some great leadership from farmers, including Henry and the likes of Donald Sheehan. And having the farmers taking ownership of the environmental agenda will be the game changer in the next 10 years. If we can manage to do it, I think that's what I'm looking forward to, with some degree of optimism. You're
dependably optimistic every time. So that's a great place to end, really on time. So thanks very much to the four of you, Caroline, who's gone, Henry O'Donnell, James Moran, and Brendan Dunford, and to you for listening. Oh, baby. Okay. Good night. Thanks very much. Bye.